The afternoon sun was filtering through my kitchen window when I heard something that made my blood run cold. I had just gotten home early from my shift at the insurance office and was putting away groceries when I heard my mother-in-law's voice drifting from the living room where my twin daughters were doing homework. "You know, girls, if your mama hadn't insisted on that camping trip, your daddy would still be here with us today." I froze, a can of tomatoes halfway to the pantry shelf. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought it might burst right out of my chest. After 2 years of grief counseling and slowly helping Emma and Sophie heal from losing their father in that terrible accident, here was Patricia undoing everything. Before I tell you this incredible story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Margaret Watson, I'm 58 years old, and I never thought my own mother-in-law would try to poison my children against me. But that's exactly what Patricia Coleman was doing in my living room that Tuesday afternoon. Patricia had been staying with us for 3 weeks, supposedly to help with the girls while I worked extra shifts to keep up with the mortgage payments since David died. I crept closer to the doorway, my hands trembling as I listened to more of her vicious words. "Your mama knew how dangerous that trail was," Patricia continued, her voice taking on that syrupy, sweet tone she used when she wanted to sound caring. "But she just had to have her way, didn't she? Just had to prove she was some kind of outdoors expert. If she'd listened to your daddy about staying home that weekend." "But Grandma Pat," I heard my daughter Emma's confused voice. "Daddy loved camping. He's the one who planned the whole trip for their anniversary." "Oh, honey, that's just what she wants you to think," Patricia replied smoothly. "Your daddy was just trying to make her happy. He told me himself he had a bad feeling about that trail, but you know how stubborn your mama can be." That was an outright lie, and Patricia knew it. David had been excited about that hiking trail for months. He'd researched every inch of it, bought new equipment, even practiced some of the more challenging sections at our local climbing gym. The rock slide that killed him was a freak accident that the Park Service said no one could have predicted. I was about to storm in there and confront her when I heard the front door open. My son Michael's voice called out from the entryway. "Mom, I'm here for dinner. Traffic was crazy coming from the warehouse." Michael Watson, my 34-year-old son from my first marriage, had been my rock since David died. He'd moved back to town 6 months ago, officially to take a supervisor position at the distribution center, but really to help me with the girls and keep an eye on our family. David had adopted Michael when he was 12, and they'd been incredibly close. "We're in here, sweetie," I called back, my voice catching slightly. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper, but I could still make out her words. "We'll talk more about this later, girls. This can be our little secret, okay? Your mama's been through enough." Michael appeared beside me in the kitchen doorway, still in his work uniform, his dark hair tousled from the wind. He took one look at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked quietly, setting down his lunch cooler. Before I could answer, Patricia swept into the kitchen with her arms wide, putting on her Grandmother of the Year performance. "Michael, there's my handsome boy. How was work today?" But Michael's eyes stayed on my face. He'd always been able to read me like a book, even as a little kid. "Mom, you look upset." Patricia jumped in before I could respond. "Oh, your mother's just tired from working so hard. I keep telling her she needs to slow down, but you know how she is about doing everything her own way." There it was again, that subtle dig wrapped up in fake concern. I saw Michael's jaw tighten slightly. He'd been noticing Patricia's little comments too. "Actually, Patricia, I heard what you were telling the girls," I said, finding my voice at last. "About David and the camping trip?" The color drained from Patricia's face for just a split second before she recovered, plastering on that innocent smile she'd perfected over the years. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Margaret. I was just sharing some memories of my son with his daughters." "You were telling them it was my fault their father died," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "You were telling them that David didn't want to go on that trip." Michael stepped closer to me, his presence steadying. "She what?" Patricia's mask slipped completely then, and I saw the cold anger in her eyes that she usually kept hidden. "Someone needs to tell those girls the truth about what happened to their daddy, and since you clearly can't handle it—" "The truth?" Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. "Patricia, I was there when Dad planned that whole trip. I helped him pick out the trail maps. He was more excited about that anniversary trip than I'd seen him about anything in years." Just then, my best friend Carol Martinez appeared at the back door, peering through the screen with a concerned expression. Carol lived next door and had been my closest friend for over 15 years. She had a key for emergencies and a standing invitation to come over whenever she wanted. "Hey, Margaret, I brought over that casserole dish I borrowed," Carol said, then paused when she saw all our faces. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" "Come in, Carol," I said gratefully. "Actually, I think you should hear this." Carol stepped inside, still holding the glass dish, her warm brown eyes taking in the tension in the room. She'd been David's friend too, had been part of our camping group for years. If anyone knew the truth about that trip, it was Carol. "What's going on?" Carol asked gently. "Patricia here was just telling the girls that David would still be alive if I hadn't insisted on going camping," I said, my voice cracking on the words. Carol's face went white, then flushed red with anger. She said what? "I was simply sharing some concerns that David had expressed to me privately," Patricia said stiffly. "As his mother, I think I knew him better than anyone." "Patricia Coleman, that is the biggest load of garbage I've ever heard," Carol said, setting the dish down with a sharp clink. "David spent 3 weeks asking me and Jim about our experiences on that trail. He bought guidebooks, watched YouTube videos, even called the ranger station twice to check conditions. That man was prepared for everything except an act of God. But what I discovered next changed everything." Carol's words hung in the air like a shield, deflecting Patricia's lies with the force of truth. I felt some of the crushing weight lift from my chest as my friend continued. "And another thing, Patricia," Carol said, her voice steady but fierce. "David specifically told me he wanted to take Margaret somewhere special for their anniversary. He said after all the years she'd supported his career and put her own dreams on hold, she deserved an adventure." Patricia's face had gone pale, but her jaw remained set in stubborn defiance. "Well, perhaps he felt pressured to say those things. A man doesn't always express his true feelings to friends." "Mom, stop!" Michael's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Just stop! This is getting ridiculous." I looked at him, surprised by the exhaustion in his voice. My stepson had always tried to keep the peace between his mother and me, walking a careful line to avoid choosing sides. But now his shoulders sagged with what looked like years of accumulated frustration. "Michael, I'm simply trying to ensure these children know the truth about their father," Patricia said, her tone shifting to one of wounded righteousness. "Someone has to look out for their interests." "Their interests?" I found my voice again, stronger this time. "Patricia, you made my daughters cry. You made them think their mother killed their father. How is that in their interests?" Carol moved closer to me, and I felt grateful for her presence. She had witnessed so many of our family moments, had seen David and me together through good times and bad. Her testimony mattered. "Where are Emma and Sophie now?" Carol asked quietly. "Upstairs in their room," I said. They ran up there crying after Michael caught Patricia in the middle of her storytelling session. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of David. "I can't believe this, Mom." I found Emma sobbing that she hated Margaret for making Daddy go camping. Sophie was asking if we could bring Daddy back if Margaret apologized enough. The words hit me like physical blows. My poor girls, carrying that burden of false guilt and confusion. I had worked so hard over the past 2 years to help them process their grief in healthy ways, to understand that sometimes terrible things just happen, that no one was to blame for the rock slide that took their father's life. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, but her expression remained defiant. "Children need to understand that actions have consequences." "What actions?" Carol demanded. "Going on a trip that David planned? Being in love with a man who wanted to celebrate their marriage? Margaret, you were supposed to stay home and what? Develop psychic powers to predict a freak weather event?" I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly feeling the full weight of the confrontation. "I can't believe this is happening. Patricia, why? Why would you want to hurt them like this? They're your son's children." For just a moment, something flickered across Patricia's face, something that looked almost like regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I loved my son," she said quietly, "and I miss him every single day." "We all miss him," Michael said, "but hurting Margaret and the girls isn't going to bring him back." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the faint sound of voices from upstairs, Emma and Sophie talking in their room. They were probably still processing what Patricia had told them, still carrying the weight of her poisonous words. Carol pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down. "Patricia, I think you need to go upstairs right now and tell those girls the truth. Tell them their daddy was excited about that trip, that he loved their mother, and that what happened was nobody's fault." "I will do no such thing," Patricia said, her chin lifting. "I won't lie to protect Margaret's feelings." "You're not protecting anyone by telling lies," Michael said, his voice rising. "You're hurting innocent kids who have already been through enough." I felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of frustration rather than pain. "Patricia, I have tried so hard to build a relationship with you. I've invited you to every birthday party, every school play, every holiday. I've bitten my tongue when you've made snide comments about my parenting, or my housekeeping, or my job. But I will not let you traumatize my children." "Your children?" Patricia's mask slipped again, revealing the raw anger underneath. "Those are David's children, my grandchildren. And I have every right to share my concerns about their welfare." "Not if those concerns are based on lies," Carol said firmly. "Not if you're using grief as an excuse to be cruel." Michael stood up straighter, and I saw something shift in his posture, a decision being made. "Mom, I think you need to leave." Patricia's eyes widened in shock. "Michael, you can't be serious." "I am serious. Margaret has been nothing but kind to you, even when you don't deserve it. She's been a good mother to Emma and Sophie, and she was a good wife to Dad. I'm tired of watching you take your grief out on her." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the war playing out on Patricia's face, between her stubborn pride and her fear of losing her connection to her son's family. But then, I heard footsteps on the stairs and Emma's voice calling out, "Mommy?" Is Grandma Patricia still here? Sophie wants to ask her something about Daddy. My heart clenched as I realized that whatever happened next would determine not just Patricia's relationship with me, but her relationship with her granddaughters. And what I discovered in that moment would change everything about how I understood Patricia's motivations. The sound of Emma's voice calling down the stairs seemed to freeze everyone in place. I watched Patricia's face transform, the hard lines of anger and defiance softening into something that looked almost like panic. For the first time since this confrontation began, she looked genuinely afraid. Grandma Patricia? Emma's voice came again, closer now. I could hear both girls on the stairs, their footsteps careful and hesitant. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her cardigan. The woman, who had been so certain of her righteousness just moments before, now looked lost, as if she was finally realizing the full weight of what she had done. Carol reached across the table and touched my arm gently. "Whatever happens now," she whispered, "remember that you're not alone in this." Michael stepped toward the kitchen doorway, then stopped, looking back at his mother. "This is your chance, Mom. You can fix this, or you can lose them forever. But that's your choice to make." The girls appeared in the kitchen doorway, Emma holding Sophie's hand. Sophie's face was streaked with dried tears, but her eyes held that determined look she got when she was trying to be brave. Emma looked older than her 10 years. Her shoulders set in a way that reminded me painfully of David when he was trying to protect someone he loved. "Grandma Patricia," Sophie said, her voice small but clear. "Emma said maybe we misunderstood what you told us about Daddy?" I felt my heart breaking all over again. My daughters were trying to give Patricia a way out, trying to make sense of the cruel words they had heard. They were protecting their grandmother even as she had wounded them. Patricia stood slowly from her chair, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Her eyes moved from Sophie to Emma, taking in their hopeful expressions, their tear-stained cheeks, the way they were holding on to each other for comfort. Patricia started, then stopped. She looked at me, then at Michael, then at Carol, as if searching for something in our faces. "We just want to understand," Emma said quietly, "because we love Mommy and we love Daddy, and we don't want anyone to be sad because of something that isn't true." The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the clock on the wall and the distant hum of the dishwasher cycling through its final rinse. Patricia's composure was cracking, and I could see years of grief and anger warring with the love she had for her granddaughters. Michael moved closer to the girls, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your grandmother has something she needs to say to you both?" Patricia's breath hitched, and for a moment I thought she might break down entirely. But then she knelt down in front of the girls, bringing herself to their eye level. Her hands shook as she reached out to touch Sophie's cheek. "My sweet girls," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something very important about your daddy and that trip he took." I held my breath, Carol's hand tightening on my arm as we waited to see which version of Patricia would emerge. The grieving mother-in-law who had been poisoning my children against me, or the grandmother who truly loved them enough to put their well-being first. But what Patricia said next revealed a truth I had never suspected, one that would explain everything about her behavior and change how I saw our entire relationship. Patricia's hands trembled as she held Sophie's face, her eyes filling with tears that had been held back for far too long. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the soft whir of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Girls, Your daddy didn't go on that business trip because he had to, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. He went because I asked him to. I felt the blood drain from my face. Michael's hand found my shoulder, steadying me as Patricia's words hung in the air, like a confession that had been waiting years to be spoken. Emma frowned, her 10-year-old mind trying to process this information. What do you mean, Grandma Patricia? Daddy had work trips all the time. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When she opened them again, they were filled with a pain so deep it made my chest ache. Your daddy called me the night before he was supposed to leave. He said he was thinking about canceling the trip because your mommy had been working so hard, and he wanted to surprise her with a long weekend away instead. The kitchen floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I remembered that conversation with David, how excited he had been about the idea of a spontaneous getaway. We had talked about maybe driving up to that little bed and breakfast in the mountains, the one we had visited during our honeymoon. But I told him, Patricia continued, her voice breaking. I told him that the client meeting was too important, that he was finally getting recognition at work, and he couldn't afford to cancel. I said you and the girls would understand, that there would be other weekends. Sophie's lower lip began to tremble. So Daddy went on the trip because you said he should? Patricia nodded, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. Yes, baby. And if I hadn't pushed him, if I had just told him to follow his heart and stay home with you and your mommy, he would still be here. The plane crash wouldn't have happened. You would still have your daddy. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time, Patricia had been blaming me for David's death, making me carry the weight of her accusations and poisoning my children against me, when she was the one who had convinced him to take that fatal trip. Carol's grip on my arm tightened, and I could see the shock and anger flashing in her eyes. But when I looked at Patricia, kneeling there broken and sobbing in front of my daughters, I felt something unexpected. Not vindication, but a deep, aching sadness for all of us. Grandma Patricia, Emma said softly, are you crying because you think it's your fault Daddy died? Patricia's sob caught in her throat. I know it is, sweetheart, and I've been so angry at myself, so guilty, that I said terrible things to you about your mommy, things that weren't true, things that were cruel and wrong. Sophie stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Patricia's neck. But Grandma, you didn't know the plane was going to crash. Nobody knew that. That's right, Emma added, her voice firm despite her tears. And Daddy made his own choice. He was a grown-up. Grown-ups make their own decisions. I watched my daughters comfort their grandmother. These wise little souls who understood forgiveness better than the adults around them. They were showing Patricia the same grace they had been trying to extend to me all these months, even when her words had confused and hurt them. Michael cleared his throat gently. Patricia, the girls are right. David made his own choice. You giving him advice about his career doesn't make you responsible for a tragedy no one could have predicted. Patricia looked up at him, then at me, her face ravaged by grief and guilt. But I've been so horrible to you, Margaret. I blamed you because I couldn't bear to blame myself. I told these beautiful children that their mother was responsible for their father's death, when all along, you were carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you either. I finished quietly. I moved closer, my anger dissolving into something more complicated. Patricia, David loved his work. He was excited about that client meeting. Even if you hadn't encouraged him, there's every chance he would have gone anyway. But the weekend you two had planned, Would have happened another time, I said firmly. David was always planning little surprises and getaways. That's who he was. One canceled weekend wouldn't have changed that. Patricia stood slowly, Sophie still clinging to her side. I've been so lost without him. He was my baby, my youngest, and when he died, I felt like I died too. But instead of grieving properly, I turned that pain into anger and aimed it at you. I convinced myself that if I could just find someone to blame, it would hurt less. The kitchen fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not tense or waiting, but contemplative. Like the moment after a storm passes when the air is clean and everything feels possible again. Emma looked between Patricia and me with the serious expression she wore when she was working through a difficult math problem. So nobody killed Daddy? It was just a really, really sad accident. That's exactly right, baby, I said, kneeling down beside her. Sometimes terrible things happen that aren't anyone's fault. They just happen, and we have to figure out how to keep loving each other even when we're sad. Sophie nodded solemnly. Like when my goldfish died, and Emma said it wasn't my fault, even though I forgot to feed him that one time. Well, maybe not exactly like that, Carol said gently, speaking for the first time in several minutes. But you're right that sometimes sad things happen, and we have to forgive ourselves and each other. Patricia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. I don't know how to make up for what I've done. The things I said to Emma and Sophie, the way I've treated you, Margaret. I've been cruel and unfair, and I've hurt the people David loved most in this world. I studied her face, seeing past the anger and bitterness to the broken woman underneath. She had lost her son, and then spent 2 years drowning in guilt and grief, lashing out at everyone around her, because the alternative was facing her own pain. We can start over, I said finally. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But for David's sake, and for the girls, we can try. Emma brightened immediately. Does that mean we can have Sunday dinners again? With Grandma Patricia's pot roast? And can we look at pictures of Daddy without everyone getting upset? Sophie added hopefully. Patricia's face crumpled again, but this time it was with relief rather than anguish. Yes, sweet girls. Yes to all of that. If your mommy will let me, I want to be the grandmother you deserve, the one your daddy would want you to have. But even as the words of reconciliation were spoken, even as the truth had finally come to light, I could see something else in Patricia's eyes. Something that told me our conversation was far from over, and that the revelation about the business trip was only the beginning of secrets that needed to be shared. The afternoon stretched into evening as we sat around the kitchen table, the weight of unspoken truths still hanging in the air. Emma had wandered off to play with her dolls, but Sophie remained curled up in Patricia's lap, tracing patterns on her grandmother's sweater with small fingers. There's something else, Patricia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. About David's last day. My stomach clenched. Carol reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Patricia, you don't have to... I started, but she shook her head. I do. I've been carrying this for 2 years, and it's been eating me alive. She looked down at Sophie, who had dozed off against her chest. Maybe we should put her down for a nap first? Carol gently lifted Sophie from Patricia's arms. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you settled on the couch. While Carol tucked Sophie in with the throw blanket from the living room, Patricia and I sat in uncomfortable silence. When Carol returned, Patricia took a shaky breath. David called me that morning, she began, before he left for the airport. He was upset about something, but he wouldn't tell me what. He said he had to go on this trip, that it was important for the business, but his voice was strange, strained. Strained how? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Like he was arguing with himself about something. He kept saying he had to do what was right, that he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Patricia's hands trembled as she folded them on the table. I asked him if everything was okay with you two, if the marriage was in trouble. My heart started pounding. What did he say? He said the marriage was fine, that you were the best thing that ever happened to him. But then he said something that's haunted me ever since. Patricia's voice dropped to barely audible. He said, "Mom, what would you do if you found out something that could hurt the people you love most, but keeping it secret was hurting them anyway?" Carol frowned. That's pretty vague. It could have meant anything. That's what I told myself for 2 years, Patricia said. But Margaret, there's more. After the accident, when I was helping you go through his things, I found something in his briefcase. Something I should have given you then, but I was so angry and hurt that I kept it. The room felt like it was spinning. What did you find? Patricia stood up slowly and walked to her purse by the front door. She returned with a white envelope, sealed and yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in David's familiar handwriting. I think he was planning to give this to you when he got back from the trip, she said, placing it on the table between us. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm so sorry I kept this from you. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. Carol moved her chair closer to mine, her presence steady and reassuring. Whatever it says, Carol said softly, we'll get through it together. Emma's voice drifted in from the living room where she was playing. Mommy, is everything okay? You all got really quiet. We're fine, baby, I called back, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Just having a grown-up talk. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. 2 years of grief and anger and confusion might be explained by whatever David had written. Or it might make everything more complicated. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I admitted. Patricia reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I've done, but David loved you more than life itself. Whatever's in that letter, it comes from that love. Carol nodded encouragingly. She's right. David adored you and the girls. Whatever he wanted to tell you, it came from his heart. I looked around the table at these 2 women who had been so important in my life. Patricia, who had been like a second mother until grief turned her bitter. Carol, who had stood by me through the darkest period of my life. And somewhere in the next room, my daughters were playing, innocent and trusting that the adults in their lives would figure out how to heal the wounds that had been festering for too long. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as I carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of David's business letterhead, folded neatly. But as I unfolded it and began to read the first line, my breath caught in my throat. Margaret, I read aloud, my voice trembling. If you're reading this, then I didn't find the courage to tell you in person, and something has happened to me. The business trip to Chicago isn't what I told you it was. I stopped reading and looked up at Patricia and Carol, my heart pounding. He lied about the business trip? Patricia's face had gone pale. I never knew this. He told me it was a conference with potential investors. Carol leaned closer. Keep reading, Margaret. We need to know what really happened. I looked back down at the letter, my hands still trembling. The next lines made everything even more confusing. The truth is, I've been meeting with a private investigator in Chicago. 3 months ago, I started having doubts about the car accident that killed my father when I was 12. I found some old police reports in Mom's attic that didn't match what I'd always been told. There were witness statements that suggested the other driver might have been someone Dad knew, not a random drunk driver. I felt the blood drain from my face. Patricia gasped audibly. "What accident?" I asked Patricia. "David always told me his father died of a heart attack when he was young." Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God! He never told you about the car accident? I thought you knew." No, I had no idea. I felt like I was discovering my husband was a stranger. Why would he lie about something like that? Carol reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Maybe he was trying to protect you from something painful." I continued reading, David's familiar handwriting blurring through my tears. "I didn't tell you, because I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid. But the investigator found some concerning connections between the other driver and a business deal my father was involved in before he died. If I'm right, my father's death wasn't an accident, and the man responsible is still alive." Patricia stood up abruptly and began pacing behind her chair. This explains so much. David had been asking me strange questions in the months before he died. About his father's business partners, about people from back then. I thought he was just going through some kind of midlife reflection. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding one of her dolls. "Mommy, why does Grandma Patricia look upset?" I quickly folded the letter and tried to compose myself. "We're just talking about some grown-up things, sweetheart. Why don't you go play with Lily for a few more minutes?" Emma studied all three of our faces with the perceptive eyes of a 7-year-old. "Are you guys fighting again?" "No, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "We're actually working things out. Grandma Patricia and I are friends again." Emma brightened and ran back toward the living room. "Lily, Mommy and Grandma made up." I waited until I heard the girls resume their play before unfolding the letter again. "There's more." Patricia sat back down, her face etched with worry. "I don't know if I want to hear this." Carol took my free hand. "Whatever it says, we'll figure it out together." The next paragraph made my stomach drop. "The investigator thinks he's found enough evidence to reopen the case, but he warned me that if we're right about this being murder, I might be putting myself in danger by pursuing it. I've decided to meet with him one last time in Chicago to review everything he's found. If something happens to me on this trip, Margaret, it won't be because of anything you did or didn't do. It will be because I couldn't let my father's death go unavenged." The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of the girls playing in the next room and the tick of the kitchen clock. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. He was investigating his father's death, and now he's dead too. Carol looked between Patricia and me. "Do you think David's accident was really an accident?" I stared at the letter, my mind racing. All this time, I'd been carrying the guilt of David's death, wondering if I could have prevented it somehow. Patricia had been blaming me. But what if David had been killed because of something that happened decades before I even met him? "There's one more paragraph," I said, my voice hoarse. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. "I've left copies of all the evidence in our safety deposit box at First National. The key is taped under the loose floorboard in my workshop, behind the workbench. If anything happens to me, please make sure the police see everything the investigator found. Don't let my death be in vain like my father's was. I love you and the girls more than life itself. David." The letter slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the kitchen table. Patricia immediately reached for it, her eyes scanning the words I'd just spoken aloud. "A safety deposit box," she murmured. "He never told me about any safety deposit box." Carol leaned forward in her chair. "Margaret, do you still have access to David's accounts? Could you get into that box?" I nodded slowly, my mind still reeling. I kept everything active for tax purposes. I never thought to check for a safety deposit box, though. I always handled our main checking account, but David took care of the savings and investments. Patricia set the letter down carefully, as if it might disintegrate. "His workshop. I helped clean it out after the funeral, remember? We moved all his tools to the garage." "The floorboards are probably still loose," I said, standing up abruptly. "We could check right now." "Wait." Patricia grabbed my wrist gently. "Margaret, think about this. If David was killed because of what he found out, and you start digging into the same information—" The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "But I can't just pretend I never found this letter. What if the person who killed David thinks I already know everything? What if Emma and Lily are in danger?" Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Let's take this one step at a time. First, we check the workshop, then we decide what to do about the safety deposit box. But we stick together on this, okay? Nobody goes anywhere alone." From the living room, I could hear Emma explaining something elaborate to Lily about her doll's imaginary adventures. Their innocent laughter felt surreal against the backdrop of what we'd just discovered. Patricia stood up and smoothed down her skirt, a gesture I recognized as her way of steeling herself for difficult tasks. "The workshop is still accessible through the backyard gate, isn't it?" "Yes, but Patricia, are you sure you want to be involved in this? If we're right about what happened to David—" She cut me off with a firm shake of her head. "That was my son, Margaret, my only child. If someone killed him, I need to know. And I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I've spent 2 years blaming you for something that wasn't your fault at all." The emotion in her voice made my throat tighten. "You were grieving. We both were." "That's no excuse for what I said to Emma and Lily, or for how I've treated you." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I was so angry, and it was easier to blame you than to accept that sometimes terrible things just happen. But if this letter is true, then maybe there was a reason after all. Just not the one I thought." Carol stood up and began clearing our untouched coffee cups from the table. "Why don't we go check the workshop now, while the girls are occupied? If we find this key, we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with." I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked toward the living room where my daughters were playing, blissfully unaware that their father might have been murdered. What if we find evidence that proves David was killed? What do we do then? Patricia's jaw set in a way that reminded me powerfully of David when he was determined about something. "Then we make sure his killer doesn't get away with it. And we make sure our granddaughters never have to wonder if their father died for nothing." As we prepared to head outside, Emma appeared in the doorway again, this time looking more serious. "Mommy, why did Daddy have to go to Chicago that time? The time when he didn't come back?" The three of us froze. I knelt down to Emma's eye level, my heart pounding. "What made you think about that, sweetheart?" "I heard you guys talking about Chicago, and Lily was asking me why Daddy went away. I told her he had to do something important, but I don't really remember what it was." I glanced up at Patricia and Carol, seeing my own alarm reflected in their faces. If Emma remembered details about David's last trip, she might know more than we realized. "Can you tell me what you remember about when Daddy left for Chicago?" I asked gently. Emma scrunched up her face in concentration. He was really worried about something, and he kept looking at papers in his office. He told me he had to go find out the truth about something that happened a long time ago. She paused, then added matter-of-factly. He said sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to protect their families. The room went completely silent. Patricia sank back into her chair, her face pale. "Emma," I said carefully, "did Daddy say anything else about what he was looking for?" But before Emma could answer, we heard a car door slam in the driveway. My heart lurched as I heard footsteps approaching the front door. The weight of everything we'd just discovered seemed to press down on me all at once. David might have been murdered. Emma knew more about his final trip than I'd realized. And now someone was here, interrupting this crucial moment when we were so close to getting answers. "Emma, sweetie, can you go play with Lily for a few more minutes?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The grown-ups need to talk." She nodded and skipped back to the living room, leaving the three of us frozen in place. I moved toward the front window and carefully peered through the curtains. A delivery truck was pulling away, and I could see a package sitting on the front step. The relief that flooded through me was so intense, my knees nearly buckled. "It's just a delivery," I announced, my voice shaky. Patricia let out a long breath. I thought my heart was going to stop. Carol moved to the window beside me. "We're all on edge. But maybe that's a sign we should take this seriously and be more careful about who we talk to and where." I stepped outside to retrieve the package, noting how my hands were still trembling slightly. The afternoon air felt cool against my flushed face. When I came back inside, Patricia was sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. "Are you okay?" I asked, setting the package aside. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the past hour. "I keep thinking about what Emma just said, about David saying he had to do scary things to protect his family. What if he knew he was walking into danger? What if he went anyway because he thought he was protecting you and the girls?" The thought hit me like a physical blow. I can't bear the idea that he might have died trying to shield us from something. Carol sat down across from Patricia. "But that would be so like David, wouldn't it? From everything you've both told me about him, he was the type of person who would put his family's safety above his own." I found myself nodding, remembering how David had always been fiercely protective. He'd insisted on walking me to my car when I worked late. He'd taught Emma basic safety rules when she started kindergarten. He'd even changed our home security system after reading about break-ins in the neighborhood. "He was," I said softly. Sometimes I used to tease him about being overprotective, but he said that was his job as a husband and father. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. "And I blamed you for his death. I told those beautiful little girls that their mother was responsible for taking their father away from them." She covered her face with her hands. "How do I live with that?" I surprised myself by reaching over and gently pulling her hands away from her face. "You live with it by helping us find the truth now, and by being the grandmother Emma and Lily deserve from this point forward." Carol nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. We can't change what's been said or done, but we can change what happens next." Through the doorway, I could hear Emma and Lily giggling over their game, and the sound strengthened my resolve. "We still need to search David's workshop, and we need to ask Emma what else she remembers, but carefully, so we don't frighten her." Patricia straightened in her chair. "What if we find something that proves David was murdered? What if whoever killed him finds out we're looking into it?" The fear in her voice matched the cold dread that had been growing in my stomach. "Then we'll figure out how to stay safe while we get justice for David." I looked at both of them. "But I need to know. Even if it's dangerous, I need to know what really happened to my husband." Carol stood up. "Then let's go check that workshop. The sooner we know what we're dealing with, the better we can protect ourselves and the girls." As we prepared to head outside, I found myself thinking about how dramatically everything had changed in just one afternoon. This morning, Patricia had been my enemy, the person who'd poisoned my children against me. Now she was my ally in uncovering a truth that could be dangerous for all of us. We stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much darker than we understood. The workshop sat at the back of our property, and I realized I'd been avoiding it for months, unable to face David's tools and projects that would never be finished. Now I was about to search it for evidence that my husband might have been murdered. The workshop door creaked as I turned the key, releasing the familiar scent of sawdust and motor oil that instantly brought tears to my eyes. David's tools hung exactly where he'd left them on the pegboard, and his half-finished bookshelf for Lily's room sat covered in a fine layer of dust. "I haven't been in here since the funeral," I admitted, my voice catching. I kept meaning to clean it out, but I could never bring myself to do it. Patricia stepped in behind me, her breath sharp with emotion. "He was always building something for those girls. Remember the dollhouse he made for Emma's 4th birthday? It had working lights and everything." Carol moved systematically along the workbench, carefully lifting papers and notebooks. "What exactly are we looking for? Letters? Phone numbers? Records of some kind?" I wiped my eyes and forced myself to focus. David kept a daily planner. He wrote down everything: appointments, phone calls, even random thoughts about projects. If someone was threatening him, or if he suspected something was wrong, he would have written it down. The three of us spread out through the small space. Patricia opened the metal filing cabinet in the corner, while Carol continued searching the workbench. I headed for David's desk, a battered wooden piece he'd rescued from a garage sale and refinished himself. The top drawer contained the usual collection of pens, screws, and business cards. But in the back, wedged behind a package of sandpaper, I found David's black leather planner from this year. "Found it," I called out, my hands trembling slightly as I opened to the weeks leading up to the accident. The entries started normally. "Pick up Emma 3:30, oil change Tuesday, call insurance about claim." But as I flipped through the pages, David's handwriting became more urgent, the notes stranger. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud. "March 15th. Gray sedan parked across street again. Same license partial. JKL. March 18th. Phone rang twice, hung up when I answered. Margaret seemed nervous when I mentioned it." Patricia stopped searching and stared at me. "You were nervous? You remember that?" I thought back, the memories suddenly clearer. I had been getting hang-up calls at work too, but I didn't want to worry David. I thought it was just telemarketers or wrong numbers. Carol moved closer, reading over my shoulder. "Keep going. What else does it say?" My heart pounded as I continued reading. March 22nd. Asked around about the construction project delays. Mike says it's not weather-related like they claimed. Something about permits being held up deliberately. March 25th. Found out who's behind the permit delays. This is bigger than I thought. Need to be careful how I handle this. "What construction project?" Patricia asked. "What was David working on?" I flipped back through earlier entries, piecing together the timeline. The new community center downtown. David's company had the electrical contract, but the project kept getting delayed. He was frustrated because the delays were costing him money and reputation. Carol frowned, studying the planner. Look at the entry 2 days before the accident. With shaking hands, I read David's final entries. March 28th. Meeting tomorrow with City Planning Office. Have evidence of bribery scheme. Hope I'm doing the right thing. March 29th. Meeting went well. Gave them copies of everything. They say investigation will start Monday. Feel relieved, but also worried. What if word gets out before then? The workshop fell silent except for the sound of our breathing. The implications of what we'd just read hung heavy in the air. Patricia sank onto David's work stool, her face pale. The accident was March 30th, the day after he gave evidence to the city. This can't be a coincidence, Carol said quietly. David discovered corruption, reported it to authorities, and died the next day. I stared at my husband's careful handwriting, each word now taking on sinister meaning. He knew he was taking a risk. Look, hope I'm doing the right thing, and worried about word getting out. He suspected this could be dangerous. But who would have known that quickly? Patricia asked. If he gave the evidence on the 29th, how would anyone have found out by the 30th? Before I could answer, I heard car doors slamming in our driveway. Through the workshop window, I could see a dark SUV parked behind Carol's car, and 2 men in suits walking toward our front door. Carol peered out the window beside me, her voice tight with alarm. Those aren't social visitors. They look official. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrifying clarity. David wrote down everything in this planner, every detail of what he discovered, who he talked to, what evidence he had. If the wrong people know we found this. Mom! Emma's voice called from the house, high and frightened. Mom, there are men at the door asking about Daddy. I clutched the planner to my chest, my heart racing. We'd found the truth about David's death, but now it seemed that same truth was about to put my daughters in danger. I pressed the planner against my chest, my mind racing. Through the workshop window, I watched the 2 men in dark suits stand at my front door, their posture rigid and official. Emma's frightened voice calling from inside the house made my stomach clench with protective fear. We need to get to the girls, I whispered to Carol and Patricia, but my legs felt frozen in place. Carol moved first, her hand firm on my shoulder. Take a breath. We don't know who they are or what they want yet. Patricia stood from David's work stool, her face pale but determined. Maybe they're just insurance investigators or something related to David's work contracts. We can't jump to conclusions. But even as she spoke, I could see the worry etched in the lines around her eyes. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. We'd just discovered evidence that David might have been killed for exposing corruption, and now official-looking strangers were at my door asking about him. Mom! Emma called again, her voice closer now, probably near the back door leading to the workshop. They said they need to talk to you about Daddy's work. I forced my legs to move, clutching the planner tighter. Stay close to me, I told Carol and Patricia. If this goes badly, I need witnesses to what happens. We hurried across the backyard toward the house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the familiar sight of David's rose bushes along the fence seemed surreal against the tension crackling in the air. This was supposed to be our safe space, our home where the girls and I were rebuilding our lives. Emma met us at the back door, her dark hair disheveled and her eyes wide with anxiety. They've been knocking for 5 minutes. Lily's hiding in her room. She got scared when she looked out the window and saw their car. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, though my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. Stay with Grandma Patricia and Carol while I see what they want. Patricia immediately wrapped her arms around Emma. Come here, honey. Let's go check on your sister. I walked through our kitchen, past the breakfast dishes still sitting in the sink, and Emma's homework spread across the counter. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, that for a moment I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe these men really were just insurance investigators, or city officials handling routine paperwork related to David's death. But when I reached the front door and peered through the peephole, my blood ran cold. Both men wore identical dark suits and had the kind of alert, watchful posture I associated with law enforcement or security. One of them was speaking quietly into a small device clipped to his lapel. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged, creating just enough space to speak through. Can I help you? The taller man stepped forward, his smile polite but not reaching his eyes. Mrs. Watson, we're here about your late husband's work on the downtown community center project. We understand he may have left behind some documentation related to permit issues. My heart hammered against my ribs. They knew. Somehow, they already knew we'd found something. I'm not sure what you mean. David died over a year ago. We realize this is difficult timing, the second man said, his voice carefully neutral. But there's an ongoing investigation into irregularities with that construction project. Any notes, files, or documentation your husband might have kept could be crucial evidence. I glanced back toward the kitchen, where I could hear Carol's voice speaking softly to Emma and Patricia. The planner felt like it was burning against my chest, where I'd tucked it inside my jacket. What kind of investigation? I asked, stalling for time while my mind raced. The kind that requires cooperation from citizens, the tall man said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound less like a request and more like a veiled threat. Through the crack in the door, I could see a third person sitting in their SUV, though I couldn't make out any details. The whole situation felt wrong, too aggressive and unofficial, despite their professional appearance. Carol appeared beside me, her presence immediately reassuring. Is there a problem? She asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. The two men exchanged glances. And you are? A family friend, Carol said smoothly. If you're conducting an official investigation, I assume you have proper identification and paperwork? I watched the men's faces carefully. The tall one reached into his jacket, but instead of pulling out a badge or ID, his hand just rested there meaningfully. Mrs. Watson, he said, this would be much easier if we could come inside and discuss this privately. We're trying to help resolve some questions about your husband's accident. The word accident hung in the air like a challenge. Behind me, I heard Patricia's footsteps approaching, and I knew she was bringing the girls with her. Emma and Lily appeared in the hallway, their faces anxious and confused. Mommy, who are those men? Lily asked in a small voice. The question seemed to break something loose in my chest. These were my daughters, still healing from losing their father. And now strange men were at our door, asking threatening questions about David's death. Whatever corruption David had uncovered, whatever dangerous truth was hidden in his planner, I wasn't going to let it hurt my children. I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at the tall man. I think you need to leave. If you have official business, you can contact my lawyer. His polite mask slipped slightly. Mrs. Watson, I don't think you understand the seriousness of the situation. I understand perfectly, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. And I'm asking you to leave my property. Now. Carol stepped closer to the door, her presence solid and reassuring beside me. Patricia moved up behind us with both girls, creating a united front of family protection. For a long moment, the men stood on my porch, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the tall one nodded curtly. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Watson. This isn't over." I watched through the window as they walked back to their SUV, spoke briefly with whoever was in the passenger seat, and then drove away. Only when their taillights disappeared around the corner did I finally release the breath I'd been holding. "Mom, what did they want?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. I turned to face my family, David's planner still pressed against my heart, and realized that finding the truth about my husband's death was only the beginning of this story.